You're on the ballot in the fall, and I guess one thing, I don't know how much time you've had to respond to it today, is did you see the job numbers today?
Oh yes, I heard about them. We got on the road very early for this funeral. And they, sadly, they're not surprising, given the policies that have been pursued by particularly the 111th Congress that preceded us and by this administration. In the House majority, we're trying to lift the burdens that we feel very strongly are holding back economic growth. Because we've got, just look at our Hudson Valley. We've got talented people. We've got great resources here. We have infrastructure. And yet we've lost 2 congressional seats over the past 10 years because there's been an outcry migration to places that have lower taxes and common sense regulation. Not the case here in New York, and we're seeing that played out now in terms of federal policy. This news coincides just about with the Supreme Court's decision last week. And I have contended that the 2010 health law, while very well-intentioned and it has the right goals, wrong way to try to go about them, but that's one of the greatest impediments to hiring that we see. And if you ask men and women in business, they'll tell you that. So we have that. We have Dodd-Frank that's making it harder for our institutions, our financial institutions, to move on a lot of initiatives they'd like to, because they're not quite sure how the regulations are going to play out. And they're actually devoting a lot of resources in anticipation of or in compliance with regulations that have already been promulgated. I know because that financial services is important in the Hudson Valley, and I'm on that committee in Congress. And then, of course, we have the highest taxes on business, small or large, in the world. S corps are, of course, individuals, pass-throughs, and we have tried in the House of Representatives to lighten all those burdens, to reduce regulatory red tape from the federal level, to rein in federal spending, because of course that crowds out opportunity, and to provide a less costly energy supply domestically, activate production. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, nearly all of the bills we've passed, almost all of them with votes from Democratic colleagues, have not gone anywhere in the Senate. Right.
The Senate seems to be certainly a sticking point, as well as the executive branch.
You have to.
So what's a voter
surmise to do? That Senator Reid is trying to be President Obama's cohort in the do-nothing Congress accusation, because it's certainly do-nothing Senate. I'm sorry, Jim. You were
No. I was going to say, a lot of voters and readers will say that they've lost complete confidence in Washington, just the generic Washington's ability to resolve anything. Sure. And it doesn't matter who's president, who's not. The other side is just going to be intransigent. Right. And do we need the election of a Republican president and a Republican Senate? I mean, short of that, will anything ever get resolved?
My personal feeling is no, we're not going to get a significant movement in the right direction. And I'm not saying this in a partisan way, but I do feel that Governor Romney would be far better at managing the economy than President Obama is. And I feel that, yes, we need a small government majority in the Senate. More typically, that's going to be Republicans. Right. And we need to hold the House. And then we will see a real movement toward lightening those burdens. And then we'll have the test to see if that actually helps us to grow the economy. My prediction would be, based on history, that it would.
Okay, all right. Let's go to your race, if we could, for a minute. How do you see your campaign, and what are the issues you think people in this district, but particularly this district here, most about?
Jobless figures here were disappointing in the spring when we heard about the Hudson Valley, when we heard about our constituent counties They are, I think, we're running just a little bit over the national average. Certainly, I think in Orange County, I think the unemployment rate is it's higher than it's been since I think the late 90s. I mean, it's really just devastating. So people want to see job opportunities. They want to see. They worry about being able to afford to live here. They want to see an economy that is growing. They want to see small businesses have the opportunity to make a profit and not immediately be required to render so much of it to the government that they can't invest in local growth and jobs. And you talk with small business owners, I've done that all around the county, and this is what they tell me. There's a level of common sense involved that we've gone far beyond, that the government has gone far beyond. People like me are fighting to restore it. Energy prices have certainly been an issue. We have very high gas prices here. Now, they've come down somewhat, and that's good, but they could come down considerably more if we had, let's say, a Keystone Pipeline authorization. In the right way. I voted against one of the Keystone bills because out on our side, we added in provision about drilling in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, and for a lot of people that's a very troubling thing. So my feeling has been, let's talk about Keystone. Let's leave the ANWR for another discussion, because that's going to take a lot of discussion.
How about some of this solar energy, Solyndra, and all that sort of stuff? That's
absolutely.
Does it look like a viable solution down the road at any point? So far, it's proven financially disastrous.
Anytime the federal government, you have to take a signal. And by the way, the other issue, if you think about federal involvement in large sectors of our economy and in our lives, micromanaging our lives, of course, the health law, which we mentioned before, is something people tell me about all the time. So that's another worry for them. But whenever you have to take a hint, to my mind, if you can't get private investment in a company like Solyndra, if you can't get citizen investment in it, not from the government sector, doesn't that tell you something? And the Department of Energy Loan Program has been rife with examples like that. I understand a certain amount of very basic research from the government level. I really do. You think about the Manhattan Project, when we did so much to develop our knowledge about atomic energy. Yes, some of it went toward weapons programs. Much of it went toward peaceful uses as well. But Solyndra is trying to produce a commercial product. That's not basic research.
And they couldn't attract any venture capital money, nothing.
Nothing. And now we know why. Because it was a dog.
Because they were smart, yes, it was a dog.
It was a dog, unfortunately.
Talking to a former investment banker over there who used to do that for a living.
There you go.
I wasn't a dog.
No, you weren't.
No, but
nor were my clients.
Solyndra, but that's it, but Solyndra was. And what we need to do, we did manage to pass the Jobs Act through the House and through the Senate. President signed it. That was back in March. And I was one of the folks who spoke in public about the Jobs Act. And the idea of that, of course, to ease some of those regulatory burdens so that we can let small startup companies grow and thrive, and also offer the opportunity to invest more easily, to have a piece of that world as a citizen, as a private citizen. But what government does is coerces. That's the key distinction to me. Government can force your dollars out of your pocket under penalty of imprisonment. If not, they're at the very least of fines and other ways of depriving you of your resources. In business, in the real economy, you have to prove your worth. Or you're not going to get anywhere.
The fittest or the most profitable.
Exactly. And I think part of the gridlock, probably the biggest part of it, is that so many, there are 435 congressional districts, there are 100 seats in the Senate for 50 states, and everybody has their little piece of the tax code, or of the regulatory picture, or of what they expect the federal government to hand out in various ways, the largesse, or the investment. And because of that, things get tied up. There is so much limited thinking or parochial thinking, or sort of like, well, you know, this is good for our state, so, you know, I'm not going to move ahead on something that would benefit the nation as a whole. And that's a big part of the gridlock issue.
And could that be resolved if, and we were talking earlier about if there's another Ronald Reagan-esque figure, whether Mitt Romney evolves into that, because once you become president, you become presidential, usually.
Yes, yes, you hope
and
so.
it needs someone that, you know, similar situation, the Carter years, Reagan comes in, took him a couple of years, but boom, he got it done. And is that what's needed to get us beyond some of this parochial infighting and partisanship?
Yes, I think that would be wonderful. There is never a time when we don't need a great, inspiring leader who projects that love for. He felt it within, but he was able to project it.
And then he was positive about America.
Exactly, and that's, you know, I mean, certainly President Reagan's been my inspiration, one of the major ones in this life, and I hope to. I'm motivated by that love of what this country represents and that enthusiasm. I'm a first-generation American. But I'll tell you the other aspect that keeps coming back to me is I listen to people. I listen to the folks I serve, and work with them on, you know, let's talk about how we solve some of these problems. And it's really crystallized in my mind that it's crucial, it's essential for the folks who vote, for our citizens to understand what's at stake. Public figures can help bring people, like President Reagan can bring people along through example, through inspiring leadership, yes, but they need to have the ability or the willingness to hear those thoughts and that message and embrace it. And I do think there's an enormous task, an enormous opportunity for educating, especially the younger members of our public. You know, I've taken it upon myself with my kids, and my dad taught me about the potential dangers of federal intervention, however well-meaning, in what should be ours as citizens to manage. My dad had me read a book written by a man named Henry Hazlitt, Economics in One Lesson.
Oh, I read that.
Yes.
I was doing some research on it. Yeah.
Yes, and it's a tremendous book. It's the only book my dad ever insisted I read, although I was an avid reader, and my dad's a wonderful man. I was happy to do it, and I read it and just thought, wow, and I was 16. He said, wow. Man, you've got to read this book.
He was a
God bless
Battle
him.
of the Bulge veteran.
World War II, Battle of the Bulge. My mother was in the British Army. She immigrated here in '48.
My father was Battle of the Bulge, too.
Yeah, yeah. My dad was in the 106th Infantry. Yeah.
I can't remember what your father said.
Yeah. And when the Germans broke through, my dad was slightly behind the lines. They were sending him out to the front that morning, but the Germans broke through.
Wow.
And they said, head west.
Wow.
What a story.
Wow.
But he had me read that book. And when I read it, and I was, you know, I had no particular education in economics, but it made eminent sense. I had my older son read it when he was the same age, and he thought, this is marvelous.
A revelation, yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
And he, you know, not that he was inclined to think that way anyway, I think, but I just, I hope that people think about the role of government in our lives. What's the proper role? What did the Constitution say?
I think too many Americans think the role of government is, let me put my hand out and I'm entitled to.
Well, I think, you know, unfortunately, that's the message that a lot of people have started to
rely on almost.
Yeah, to assume is the case. And I think the president, in particular, and the president is the single man or woman, of course historically always been men so far, but the single man who has the biggest public voice, we all know that. And the way that President Obama will phrase it is that instead of, there's a virtue in being strong and independent whenever we are capable of being that way, most of us are. he will phrase it as you're on your own, you know, and nobody should ever be on their own when they're in need. That's why we have supportive communities. That's why we have charity, and yes, it's why we have a safety net. No question about it, and we do at various levels, local, state, and federal. And in no way are Republicans trying to, especially our Social Security and Medicare programs, are definitely a safety net for seniors in a lot of ways. And we intend to keep those going because that's a commitment we made. But it does become a matter of expecting that the government's going to provide.
Right.
And I think, unfortunately, it weakens us. And what President Reagan extolled so inspiringly was that as Americans, there's a can-do spirit. We can do things. We can make things. We can compete with the rest of the world.
You think the Democrats are overplaying, or certainly playing it, but overplaying the wealth envy and the, a businessman is now almost considered the enemy? Oh,
well, I will tell you. And I really do. I like the folks I work with on the other side of the aisle. I work happily with Democratic colleagues, have many times. I don't question their patriotism. I don't question their hearts at all. But I will tell you, when I'm sitting in financial services, a good number of these folks will express the concept that if someone's made a profit in whatever endeavor, that someone else has been taken advantage of.
Right.
And I think, unfortunately, the president tends to play into that. And I think that's honestly earned profit that doesn't rely on the government putting its finger on the scale for you.
Right, right.
That's a whole, why do we have gridlock? Because so many entities will go in and say, gee, great idea to streamline the government, but, we like our piece of this thing. But honestly, gaining profit is a sign that you've done something right.
Yeah.
It's a social good. It means that you can then take the energy.
You normally pay taxes on that too.
Well, people do. I always did. In my little medical practice. Every dollar we brought in was reported and paid taxes on the way it should have been.
Your experience on the financial committee is, what do you say to people who feel like the president and Congress bailed everyone out except them? People can't sell their houses, they can't get a mortgage if they, and that to me, I just wonder how you deal with that as a congresswoman, the frustration there.
Right. Well, number one, people are understandably frustrated. So I certainly share their frustration. That's why I ran for Congress. They have seen the massive misallocation of tax dollars, what should be consumer side dollars, into efforts that have benefited a few, perhaps, but not them.
There doesn't seem to have ever been anyone truly held accountable. Usually most disasters, you drag somebody before one of your committees or something, and somebody goes to jail. Right. Some of these, the guy at Countrywide Mortgage,
Angela Mazzillo,
that people are just scratching their head going, how has this guy not been penalized or punished?
MF Global, you look at MF Global, John Corzine.
John Corzine's sitting on a beach somewhere.
Absolutely, and I asked him about basically a culture of deference toward him that was really unjustified, and I still do suspect that somewhere, the investigation's ongoing, but that somewhere there's going to be a finger pointed squarely at his brand of decision making, or the way he managed the organization, the signals they read from him. But it's important to recognize that honestly earned profit is, that's translating the energy you put into your business, you and the team you work with put into your business. That's the energy you put in that only motivated people can put in. They'll work that extra hour. They'll go that extra mile for a customer.
Because they're going to be rewarded for it.
Right, because and because they feel it's the right thing to do, but they also, yes, that's right, they can be rewarded for it. And that energy then translates into dollars that they can use to improve the business, to hire more. It's a win-win. Even if they just put their earnings in the bank, what will the bank do? The bank will loan.
Hopefully.
With well, if they don't have bank regulators, our small community banks have bank regulators breathing down their necks about stuff that unfortunately, again, defies common sense.
Into the election is a couple of things. One, you and Chris Gibson, it seems, at least being in this area, have been by the Democrats demonized and targeted. And you know, I picked up the New York Post the other day, and there was your picture, along with Chris and one other congressperson, and that they're so frantic to get you. Why is that? Other than just the normal Republican Democratic thing, why are you such a lightning rod, or you think you are?
Well, this is a swing district. The Hudson Valley is it has lots of Republicans and Democrats and independents. They don't have a dominant party, so the person who serves in Congress in this district has to have a broad portfolio of reaching out to the constituency, and it's very tempting territory for our Democratic counterparts to want to take this seat, and Chris's has a similar composition. So we're sort of what they call swing districts in a state that is considered, we're considered an orphan state because it's anticipated, although I would say it's really not a foregone conclusion, that President Obama will carry the state of New York.
Yes, as most Democrats.
Right.
How about your opponent in this? Have you had much time to consider your opponent, other than the fact that you knew you'd have one?
Right. Well, I called him to congratulate him after his primary, Mr. Maloney.
Yep.
And, we ran, when I ran against Congressman Hall, we ran a very positive campaign. I do run to win because I hope to be worthy of people's votes in the right way by being the best representative with the best team of people we can be. But clearly, there's Mr. Maloney, what I've heard from him so far indicates that he espouses policies that will keep us in this dismal state. And not only that, but we are really edging very close to a long-term debt burden that will be almost, it will have a snowball effect. If interest rates rise, we're going to spend so much of our, so many of our hard-earned dollars in taxes just paying the interest on the debt. That surely a continuation of the kind of policies that take dollars out of the real economy and send them to the federal government, when the federal government should be much more modest, much more restrained and streamlined, and concentrate on what it has to do. And I represent a clear alternative to that.
Is it fair to say that Mr. Maloney has worked for Bill Clinton, Elliot Spitzer, David Patterson, that he's close to a professional politician, which is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, I find it intriguing that he has a primary residence in Manhattan. He has a weekend home in Sullivan County. Apparently, he's purchased a small residence in Cold Spring. But why not run where you live?
Right.
I've lived in the Hudson Valley for 24 years. So to me, given the the professional political history, they kind of looked at the map and said, oh, well
he did work
gee, Sean, this is kind of close to.
Well, he did work for the Clintons, and Mrs. Clinton famously moved to New York when it suited her.
Yes, didn't she?
He may have noticed that, and that
maybe
it worked out okay for her, but we're not so sure about this guy.
This is the voters will have a very clear distinction.
Okay. A couple more questions, and I'll let you. I know you've had a long day.
No, whatever you want to do, I'm fine.
Speaking of of your opponent. He's made much of the fact that he's gay,
Yeah.
which is fine and dandy.
Sure.
Do you think that's going to play any significant role in the campaign, and that you have a son who is gay, and I think, or are people just going to go, so does everybody else? Everybody's got different members
Certainly
of their family.
that's my response.
Okay.
You know,
What's it to you?
yeah, I'm not concerned at all about that. In
Right.
any way, I am very concerned about what he's proposing for our economy, which is going to sink us.
Right, okay.
You know, so that's that's a universal alarm that we have to share. But no, live and let live.
Okay, good. Caroline, you got anything?
Obamacare, would you vote to repeal it?
Yes, I will be voting to repeal on July 11th.
Oh, is that when it's coming up on the floor?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir. Repeal and replace.
Yep, okay.
And what do you want to
It's got to be
replace
replaced. Here are the 4 pillars that I personally, it's just Nan speaking, but I am a doctor. I'm the only female physician with voting privileges in the House of Representatives.
All right.
And we have 3 senators who are physicians. They're all men. So I have a little bit of a distinctive voice, which is nice. But the 4 aspects that I'd like to see served in just common sense things. We want to, fundamental principle, put the citizen at the center of his or her health care. Right now, with the terms of that 2010 law, Washington's going to be controlling our health care at a cost of $2 trillion to administer this law. All the bureaucracies, all the boards, all the panels, all the programs. $2 trillion. $500 billion on Medicare that we can't afford. Absolutely can't afford. That has got to go back into Medicare. Medicare is going broke, formally speaking, as it is. But the 4 things I would do to empower our consumers. 1, make health savings accounts the standard by which all of us who are working age, capable of doing these things, those of us who don't need particular special help, that's how we would get our health insurance. And I'm going to mention an example where that's worked very well. The second one, of course,
kind
is
of like
pre-tax dollars.
Yeah.
If people can put away for routine care, routine expenses, and then what people
Like
will
the
typically
flexible
do.
spending plan, but out
Exactly,
here.
but a health savings account. And you don't see a lot of them in the state of New York because they're hard to set up here. They shouldn't be hard to set up here, but they are because New York's insurance is so complicated. So individuals and small businesses find it very difficult to set up. But where people do have them, they like them. And when you meet folks who have them here, they like them because they do have a lot of choice. It allows them to think about whether it makes sense to have a procedure or a prescription or something done. And a lot of times if you ask your doctor, gee, do I really need this test again? Because I just had it 3 weeks ago. They'll say, no, you know what, come to think of it, you don't. I mean, it's an active interaction, which is good. But the other is make insurance products available to anybody anywhere in the country. Open up sales of insurance across state lines. And these are things that can be done. It would take, there's a lot of moving parts. We'd definitely have work to do, but the principle would be able to buy insurance from anywhere, have a real range of choices and prices, let them compete on quality and on price. That's what auto insurers do, for example, right? And the idea is to drive your costs down so you can do more with your dollars. There's a place in the country where those things have worked very well, and that's in the state of Indiana. Governor Daniels is a Republican, and the legislature there, Democrats and Republicans, this was not a partisan effort, set up a program, health savings accounts for Medicaid recipients. The state funds them. And state employees have been allowed to set up their own health savings accounts. Voluntary participation by state employees went from about 4% when the program started, all the way to well over 90% now.
Really?
Over the course of a couple of years. It's worked very well. The savings for the folks holding the accounts and for the state of Indiana as employer and Medicaid provider, insurance provider, if you will, has been, they've run into the tens of millions of dollars. I mean, it really does work. It's a model that works. And if you look at the Massachusetts experience, there was just an article out in the past 24 hours that the state of Massachusetts, 43% of their budget is now going to be taken up with health care. 43%. Because while they increased access in principle, they still have a third-party payer system, meaning, somebody else's money. It's your money, but, it feels like somebody else's money going to pay for care. So they don't have the kind of consumer-based decision-making that would help people to make smart choices and save resources. And the cost is enormous, and now they're looking at how they can clamp down on providers or care or the insurers to try to make it work. In Indiana, they said, let's let consumers make more decisions. Let's let patients and doctors make more decisions. And it's worked very, very well.
It's called what? Indiana Plus?
That's where you're
Healthy
from, right?
Indiana. I'm from Indiana.
Oh, yeah.
I know Governor Daniels. I've gotten to know him over the past couple of years. Just a terrific guy. Now, I have lived in the Hudson Valley for 24 years. I left my home state of Indiana when I was 18, basically, moved out here. But in any case, that works. The other two pillars, liability reform. Defensive medicine is a unique problem in the United States. The 2010 health law basically took as its model the National Health Service in England. Well, and what you end up with is everybody gets government care except for a very thin layer of folks who really just have completely private care. That's not what America's used to. And we talk about equal opportunity. That's really, that's not. Americans will not sit patiently for 4 months waiting for their hip replacement.
That's true.
Right. Get in line. Americans will not accept not being able to have access to a service, and we have a very costly defensive medicine problem because there is such a liability culture and a certain amount of jackpot justice, if you will, that no other country in the world has, but we do. So that has got to come under control. There was no effort, realistically, to address that in the 2010 law. And the final piece is high-risk pools. For people who really would have trouble getting insurance, we can help those folks.
So they do that in the automobile, right?
There's yeah, exactly. We can help those folks, but that's really a fairly small number of people, and relative to the entire population of the United States. With the passage of the 2010 law, the high-risk insurance became available to people, who had pre-existing conditions and that were going to preclude their getting insurance, and that's great. About 70,000 people have signed up for the program across the country. Now, for $2 trillion, we can take care of those folks for far less, and give them great care. So this is what we're talking about.
Okay.
Also the panels.
Yes, well, that's right. One of the ways that they're going to try to control costs is by denying reimbursement. Technically, they're not denying care, but what they'll do is they'll cut reimbursement to providers for procedures. That's an IPAB, Independent Payment Advisory Board. That's part of this 2010 law. And it's a board of bureaucrats who will be able to make these decisions. In essence, and I can tell you, I practiced for 16 years, and unfortunately, it's hard to keep your doors open if reimbursements are very low for the things you're doing. And certainly, we had some challenges with some insurers, and we couldn't afford to participate in their programs anymore. Yeah. So it's a real thing. And I worry about our Medicare patients having access to care. Well,
how do you handle that, or think about it in terms of some of these new biologics and the drugs that are coming out that are $70,000 to extend your life by 3 months?
Exactly.
Should the government pay for that? Do you only do it to a certain age? I mean, it's a very gray area.
It is, and that is a multi-pronged challenge. It's because of our liability culture, it's very, very costly to develop drugs or biologics in the United States. So that's part of it. Research costs here are very high. And in fact, we're actually driving research out of the United States for that reason. And there's also a tax on medical devices in the 2010 law, which is driving medical device manufacturing out of the United States, just as an aside. So part of it is it's very costly to develop medications here. And another aspect is that in the rest of the world, governments will demand that pharmaceuticals and biologics be priced low. Those costs get shifted into our
market.
Right, our market. And some of that has to do, believe it or not, with trade policy. So we really have to adjust our trade policy to reflect those things, because what I've heard it, I was in the healthcare communications industry for a couple of years and worked with pharmaceutical companies, and what they said was a sovereign nation will say, well, if you won't provide for our consumers to buy your product at X price, we'll simply copy it. We'll violate your patent, and your U.S. patent, and we'll copy it.
And that goes back a little bit to the same entitlement philosophy, which is begrudging the pharmaceutical company that's spent a fortune developing.
They do, and they'll get a hit, something that actually works and passes muster with all the clinical studies and everything else, maybe 1 out of 1,000 different molecules that they look at.
As I've heard out there, trying to make you into something that you're not. In doing research for this discussion, you're kind of all over the place. You're very moderate and socially and a lot of things, and environment and the kind of thing. You're not the cookie cutter Republican they're trying to make you out to be.
I want a light hand of government upon us in whatever way that involves. And I do feel, I want to be responsible as a steward of our environment, because I do feel that it's a heritage and it's a legacy for the future. I know what it's like to live with serious industrial pollution. Where I grew up in Northwest Indiana, we had steel mills, we had Sherwin-Williams paint manufacturer, we had refineries, we had chemical companies. And when I was a little girl, the smell of polluted air, actually, I thought that's what air was supposed to smell like. Believe it or not, we go to visit my grandmother in the farm country in Ohio, beautiful, sweet, clean air, and I would say, you can't smell this air. So I really was, and there's something wrong here. And then we get back to, Northwest Indiana, yep, now of course, I drive through Linden, New Jersey, I'm like, whoa, but so I value the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act, because I know what things were like before then. And so we do need those protections. They have to be rational. There is a rational level. So on some measures that have been brought forth by the House majority, I voted yes, and on some I voted no. I weigh out all these decisions, but I definitely have a strong feeling that there is an appropriate federal role in protecting the environment to help reward consumers for, or incentivize consumers for doing smart things in terms of their carbon footprint. And whatever you think of global warming, it's still wise to conserve resources in a rational way. So a lot of people want to make energy saving improvements on their homes. Well, nothing wrong with that. They're going to save costs. They're going to save carbon. It's a win-win. A program was devised called PACE, Property Assessed Clean Energy. And it allows, states have to authorize their municipalities to do it. New York allows it, California allows it. Not every state does, but many do. So it's a state-by-state thing. Where the federal government gets involved is that the federal government backs up 90% of the mortgages in this country. And PACE is a program that allows people to pay overtime to pay for energy saving or water saving improvements on their homes or properties through a special property tax assessment. So municipalities can set up special assessment districts. They can issue municipal bonds, which typically are triple tax free. And the costs of administering the program are covered in eventually the payout by the property holder. So there's really very little in the way of taxpayer cost, other than, you know, if you factor in the revenues that you don't bring in from tax-free bonding. But other than that, this really, I mean, this is a great way to provide an alternative for people to finance those kinds of improvements. But because of the fact that it's a property tax assessment, if there's a foreclosure, then typically property taxes have to be paid first before the mortgage holder gets paid. And so Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, as the secondary mortgage holder for 90% of the mortgages in this country, has said, if you have a mortgage backed by Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac, you cannot participate in PACE. Wow. So we're trying to set conditions. I've introduced a bill, the PACE Protection Act, which is trying to set conditions that will, because in fact, PACE participants have a lower rate of foreclosure than other mortgage holders. So what we're trying to do is set certain conditions, reassurances for both private mortgage industry and Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac.
And I know they need to go, but just the commuter savings act.
Yes, absolutely.
Say again?
The commuter savings act. That's not over. She just introduced it. Got a lot.
Yes, and that's another bill to try to help give people a break. Sure. Anyway, we're trying to get that PACE Protection Act going. It's a little bit of a challenge because there are a lot of minds that we have to change about the way that PACE might act in a foreclosure, but as I say, those folks usually do very well. Okay. So we're working on that. And the Commuter Savings Act I just introduced, and that was in response to the fact that as part of the stimulus program, there's a tax credit that folks who drive and park can claim on their federal taxes. And over the years, that's gone up. I think it's due to go up to $240 per month. People who take mass transit can also claim a tax credit, but it's lower. So during the stimulus, one of the things they did was to equalize those two numbers so that mass transit commuters could have an equal tax credit to drivers who park. That extra credit for mass transit expired on January 1st, 2012. It was not renewed in the transportation bill that we just passed through the House and Senate, the consensus report for House and Senate. Big bill that helps us with the Tappan Zee Bridge funding, helps streamline the process of road and bridge infrastructure in particular. So it was a good bill to vote for, but unfortunately it did not have an allowance for our mass transit.
Did that just get overlooked, or did somebody oppose it?
No, it was because it expired as part of the stimulus. It was hard to argue that it should be put back because really the stimulus, so-called stimulus, didn't help us at all. Which is why we're stuck with an unemployment rate stubbornly at or above 8% now for something like 42 straight months. Awful, awful stuff. So what I proposed was this: let's restore that equalization so that mass transit users can have the same amount of tax credit as drivers, because mass transit helps save the environment. Right? It's just less of a carbon footprint when you travel by mass transit, which I did for the 2 years I was commuting to the city from Bedford. And it also saves wear and tear on our roads and bridges. Yeah. So it does help our infrastructure, and it helps reduce traffic congestion. It's
sounds too logical to be passed by.
Yes, well, but folks do worry in this day and age. They say, well, okay, but those are anticipated tax revenues, so how are you going to balance that out? And the way I propose balancing it out is to tap into one of the discretionary funds, some people informally call them slush funds, in the 2010 health law, to cover, shift those revenues back into people's pockets, basically. So that's nice. We're giving them back to, shift funds back into our citizens' pockets. And the fund that we proposed be tapped is one that the president himself has said we can repurpose dollars from. So that's our proposal. Now, having said that, friends have asked, and rightly so, but gee, Nan, don't we want to simplify the tax code anyway? So aren't we trying to get out of all these complexities, deductions and credits, exemptions?
Sure.
Fair point. And I'm all for clean sheet of paper approach. I would like to simplify that. I voted for that in the House budget. Simplify the tax code as much as possible. You know, I would love to see a postcard tax or very, very
Put a
close.
lot of lawyers out of work.
Well, you know, and they'll find other great work. Because you know they'll find ways that you know they're going to help with expanding our businesses all around the world. You know, and in this country, yeah. But anyway, that's I would like to see that very much simpler tax code. But until that happens, I'm going to fight for our mass transit users to have that equalization.
What's the difference between the 240 and when it went down?
Well, it's 125.
125.
Yeah, so you figure, you know, that's about $115 roughly per month. So it's going to be, you know, yeah, $1,200 some dollars that people will be able to save.
Let me get you out of here with a random question.
Actually, one more before you go.
Sure, whatever you want.
Any thoughts or comments on how people see the differential tax rates, especially amongst financial firms, hedge funds?
Right,
How they're
the carried
paying-
interest,
Yeah.
capital gains.
They're
Yeah.
not paying the interest that you or I would pay.
Yeah, you know, that's, I think that's a source of heartburn for a lot of folks. And again, my whole argument goes back to let's simplify the tax code so we can give everybody a break. And I think most folks would say they'd be happy to do that. You know, right now I think the carried interest or capital gains that they pay is about 15% of their of what they take, what they recover from their investments, so to speak. And I do understand that argument in terms of, you know, these are investments that they've made. They don't, a lot of them fail. But I think probably there'd be acceptance, hey, you know what, if we're going to simplify the tax code and everybody's going to pay, you know, 19% or, you know, a 10%, 25% split, 10%.
Ever been a fan of the flat tax or national
I mean,
sales
the so-called
tax?
fair tax?
Yeah.
I'm not, I don't think it, I think it'd be hard to administer. You know, so I know that was that came up in the last election, actually, because, you know, folks said, well, Nan should have 20% sales tax. It's like, well, really, no, I don't. You know? Number one, I'm not a fan of that plan. And, you know, number two, I never said that would be a good thing to do. I respect the folks who have thought about it and said, well, you know, you do it on the consumption end instead of the income end. You know, I'm with Lars Larson. I was just on his program last week, and you know, he said the same simple thing. I said, I think it's too complicated.
Right. Anything, and I'll let you out with this.
That's right.
Anything completely surprised you or caught you flat-footed since you've been in Congress? Any misconceptions where you kind of went, gee, I never thought I'd have to deal with that, or
anything you want to share with us?
Yeah, you know what? I tell you, it hasn't really. I went with an open mind. Obviously, I knew enough about the outlines of the role that I could run intelligently, but I'm a citizen legislator, as are over 40 members of that big freshman wave, remarkably enough, that came in 2010 to the Congress, to the House of Representatives. And that's all great. But there is a learning curve, no question about it. And I will tell you, it's interesting maybe for folks to think about, but you know, I always got home on my mind when I'm in Washington. Obviously, I always wear the pin from the chairman of our Veterans Committee. You know, I also have a congressional badge I wear when I'm in Washington. But of course, I can be, you know, the best. I do work to be the best legislator I can be on the Hill. But you know what? Every day I'm also working here because we have a team of very dedicated people here making sure that our constituents get the more specific directed services and help that they need with veterans issues, with Social Security and Medicare, with the EPA, whatever the case may be. Because you know, it's so important that you be able to not only legislate sensibly about national policy, but be able to make sure that your constituents are getting the very localized.
And you're in the district a lot, I mean, I see you all the time.
Yes, sir.
So does everyone, which is.
It's a privilege.
It's noticed, but it's noticed.
Well, I get the sense that it is.
Yeah.
It is remarkable.
People like to see their representative.
They do, and I've been very blessed also. I actually, sometimes I'm on their TV screens.
Yes.
A fair amount, because I've been lucky. I'm one of those people who just show up, do the work.
Yeah.
Be useful,
Yeah.
be grateful, and everything else flows. And it's not about me, it's about everybody I'm serving.
Yeah.
So I've been lucky, I've been able to become a voice, so you're right, between all that, people say,
I know her.
man, yeah,
Yeah.
and a nice lady who's a Democrat, she told me, ran up the other day, it's probably about 3 weeks ago now, and I forget where I was, and she said, Nan, I'm a Democrat, but I'm voting for you.
That's a good sign.
You're a good servant, basically, that was, I like what you're doing. It's like,
So you feeling good about the fall?
I am if we
Yeah.
keep working.
Yeah.
Take nothing for granted.
Yeah.
Never, but yes, because
Coming up?
yeah, and I have, because I've been everywhere in the district since November 3rd, 2010. I mean, and for, of course, well over a year before then, everywhere I could be, I was.
Yeah.
And we went right back on the road. We didn't say, okay, election, well,
Right.
that's good.
Let's sit back for a year or two,
Oh,
yeah.
right, nothing like that. I mean, constant, which is great, because you really get to know people. It's a great blessing.
And views on immigration and
Yeah.
in general, how it affects the Hudson Valley?
Sure. I'll tell you where I hear the most about it in terms of specifics that we could be helping with right now is in our agricultural areas. That those agricultural worker visas
Right.
are way too hard for farmers to obtain.
I've heard that too.
Yeah, and it's a really tough problem because the Department of Labor is just fairly inflexible in immigration naturalization, or it hasn't been something that we've been able to get very far, or that members of Congress have been able to get very far with. We keep trying to be an advocate for changing it until we get a national immigration policy settled, which really we don't have.
Yeah, how does that ever get resolved? I mean, the people that are here get sort of backdoor amnesty.
Yeah.
Is that fair to the people that have been waiting dutifully in
Right.
line?
Well, respect for the rule of law.
Yeah.
It feels fundamental.
Yeah.
And yet it's very true. If a child is brought here, I'm thinking about the executive order, and then Senator Rubio had been
Right.
basically talking about that same thing, and I think it does need to be done through legislation. But
that's got to be one.
People
It's
came as
unlikely.
kids.
It's unlikely to discourage someone who's going to bring their whole family in.
No, you're right. You're right.
Come in and have a child here if
You're
they
right.
know that this is going to pay off.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. It's an essential condition. If you're going to have the kind of in the 19th century, we did not have strict immigration laws. I mean, people could be turned away at Ellis Island if it looked as though they had certain communicable diseases or certain health conditions that were regarded as potentially dangerous. But other than that, it didn't matter what country people came from. Now, that certainly is a lot easier to administer than what we have now.
Right.
So we probably have to look at all these things again, but the two fundamental aspects that, no matter what we do, one, let's have an economy that's growing. Because if we have the kind of vigorous, enterprise, rewarding citizen economy that we had in the 19th century in so many ways, then we can provide, because people worry about jobs, we can provide a vigorous economy that will compete with the rest of the world and be able to generate jobs. And then I think that it helps all of us think more calmly about welcoming
Yes.
new immigrants. My mother's an immigrant, so now she came, of course, legally. But the other aspect of it is, if you're going to have a restricted immigration policy, you can't have porous borders.
Right.
I mean, it just goes without saying. So,
Makes sense.
you understand the impetus in Arizona to try to take the problem in hand, because from the federal level, they're not getting the support they need, and they're on the front lines. So I respect the Supreme Court, but if we don't have, you know, if we have porous borders, we can't have an immigration